So I have this friend of mine who moved to Canada. He was way older. He was above 40, late 40s, technically, in a way, or maybe mid 40s. And, he's struggling a bit with just adjusting to the culture, the nuances, and all that. And that's what I really like about Siamak's episode, because I feel like he does share a really good way to approach moving if you're much older. Like if you're trying to move and you're above 40, like how do you move? Like what do you do? What do you do to adjust? And it's not that he shares like a template or like, oh, you need to do step A, you do this, step B, you do that. No, I think it's more like there's a mental framework, like how do you approach this move? What are the things you need to think about? What are the things you need to prepare for? And so I think this is a really good episode if you're someone who's above 40 and if you're looking to move. I also think if you're below 40 and you're thinking of immigrating or you've immigrated, like Siamak really gives a masterclass in how to move, because he's moved 14 times, some of them to new countries, some of them to new cities. He's an experienced mover. I mean, I literally cracked a joke with him saying you should probably start a moving company, maybe a human moving company. So, welcome to the podcast. I feel like I'll just dive straight in here because I feel like we've been talking for a while right now. And I'm just going to continue what we're talking about when we talked about community. And I just wanted to get your thoughts I wanted you to continue talking about the point on people say you move to a new place and, you should be open to the experience, like, meet new people and stuff. But there's also the argument about no, you need that, but at the same time, you need to find a balance between meeting new people and your community.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I know we should have had this probably a few weeks earlier, but due to me traveling, it didn't happen. But I'm glad to be on the podcast. As an immigrant, one of the things that most of us we underestimate before moving to a new country is the support system that we have in our own country, from friends, from family. No matter how comfortable you are with the new language or how expert you are, it might be your second language, or even it might be your first language, but the culture and everything is foreign to you. Even if you look at Canada, it's a land of immigrants. There are so many immigrants here. You never find yourself as an outsider, but you got to have the support system. You got to have that loved ones or family, friends, people that you can trust in, and then they can, kind of support you whenever you need it. One of the things that I tell pretty much everyone who wants to immigrate to a new country, I say, having a job, having a career, where a job takes you, it does matter. I never underestimate that, because you need to have a career. And if you're moving as an adult, you got to have that kind of a lifestyle that you have maintained in your home country. And you go through hardship at the same time. You want to have a job, you want to have all that, but then support system matters. If you have a good support system, they will help you to get you in terms of your career where you want to be. And those things, they matter. Many of us, we have learned those things the hard way. And we want to tell other immigrants that you don't really need to make that mistake. Just pack and go anywhere might be a solution when you are not actually moving to a new country. Once you move here, you realize the support system, the family, the friends, and all that, they matter. From a climate and weather standpoint, you may say, oh, that place is too cold. We were just talking about it, negative 30 degrees Celsius or negative 25 degrees Celsius. That's really cold. Yes, it is. But what if you go somewhere which the weather is nice, but you don't really know anyone and no one is willing to help you out? Which one you pick over the other one? I mean, clearly you want to be in a really nice climate, have all your loved ones around you, have the best job ever, and then live with them. But that doesn't necessarily happen. I mean, if that would have happened, you wouldn't be an immigrant. Let's just start there.
So true. So true. I like how you put it, because we tend to think that life is perfect, but life is never perfect. the ducks never line up in a row. They probably do in the movies, but not in real life. Like they never line up in a row for
Even
you.
Hollywood gave up on that. I think they realized that it's too good to be true doesn't really work, and people these days are much smarter than probably 4 decades ago. They need to bring a little bit of reality into whatever Hollywood has been selling. But the truth is, the old saying that um, we need to play the best with the cards that are given to us. Like we can't really pick and choose. If we could, that would be a really great story, or would have been a fantastic opportunity in life, but it doesn't really happen that way. For some reason, you need to start somewhere with college or grad school. Clearly, that grad school, probably the first one when you move to a new country, is not the best one, or it's not really located in the best place in that country. Many of my friends, I remember, they moved to Canada or the States as a master's student, but the first grad school was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, you can call it, or a good school, but they didn't really know many people. When they applied for their PhD, they knew things better than when they were moving from Iran, because number one, they had a degree from a Canadian university. Number two, they had their support system. They had friends, the professors. They could communicate easily with them in a different province, in a different place, different city, and they could actually go and visit the new place easily by a plane ticket, which would cost them much less than what it would have cost them to move from the other side of the globe. So one of the things that many of us we did is just you go for the first place, you just settle, and after a few years, you can move to a different place. It doesn't really mean that you're not a tree; you can move actually. So that's something that you need to take into account when you move as an immigrant. I mean, you already moved once; might as well just move another time, or another time, and another time. And I've moved 14 times in my entire life, so. So I make this. I always say that if this entire business that I have around intellectual property, it doesn't really work, I can literally open a moving company and help people to move a couple thousand kilometers and miles from one location to another. So
yeah, that's so true. We landed in Ottawa, and we stayed there for a year, but the first 6 months we were like, nah, we're moving. And so we just decided to move out, and we moved to Calgary after 1 year in Ottawa. And for us, like, that was the best call we made, because I remember then people were like, gosh, Calgary's colder, all that.
oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, yeah. I actually disagree that it's colder. I just think that there's a difference in, the degrees are a bit higher here, like it's more, but in Ottawa, it's humid cold is worse. Here, it's dry cold. It's much better to handle. But I'm like, I
And
have
it's your
friends
life,
here. I have a
the
huge
way that you live it the
yeah,
way you want to. Another thing.
exactly. And then we moved, and it's been the best call we made so far. But I want to, now that you talked about the sports system, I want to kind of go back, because I know in the pre-show, and we've been talking a bit, talked a bit about stuff. I know you did mention you've moved. First of all, you actually said you've moved 14 times, but more like let's talk about your move from Iran to the States, and then all the moves you've had up till now. Like, one is like, how are you doing it? And like, what do you tell yourself before you move the 10th time, the 11th time?
Amazing. It's amazing. Exactly 2 days ago, and I put something on LinkedIn, just marked 22 years since I moved from Iran I moved from Iran. So on December 6th, 2001, I moved from Iran to the States as a graduate student to just do a master's at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And, I didn't really have much problem in terms of language proficiency. I could speak the language fluently, and but the entire North America was somewhat unknown to me. I had never traveled to the U.S. or Canada. I traveled to Europe when I was a child, but that was probably back in '80s, and I was always traveling with my parents. So it was one of the very first times that I was actually traveling as an adult by myself. And then I was trying to go and get settled and live there. It was a challenge. Many things were new. The culture was new. The environment was new. So it's it was one of those things that for the first 6 months I was somewhere between being puzzled and being in the middle of a tornado, which was taking me from one thing to another. But luckily, things they ended up working out because I had 3 classes, 3 courses, 9 credits. Then I was doing teaching assistant thing, and I was pretty occupied with different things. So it didn't really give me much time to get homesick. However, no matter how busy you are, there are moments that you get really homesick and you keep thinking about your family and friends and all that. But then I had extended families in the US and I had some friends. So I managed to survive for a few years. And then my parents, they visited me a few times. So the master's, I finished it in about 2 years, a little bit less probably, 3 semesters to be exact. And then I was planning on um, applying for PhD and then moving to another place. Believe it or not, one of the universities that actually I got admission from was University of Toronto. But due to some visa issues, due to listening to people that they said, oh, Toronto is really cold, Canada is really cold, I didn't accept that. And I thought, why do I even move there? So I started doing PhD at the George Washington University. There were a few hiccups, but I managed to actually finish my degree and get a PhD in 2010. Then I decided to move to Michigan to do a postdoc because I thought, well, academia is something that I love. Let's give it a try. So from Washington, D.C., you move to Michigan without knowing anyone. The hardest part for that was it was really cold. I moved in January. So it was such bad time that even the person working as an HR in the mechanical engineering department at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, she said, what are you doing this time in Michigan? And I said, believe me, beggars can't be choosers. I got the job offer and it happened to be in January. End of the story. But and I was in somewhere called limbo, to be honest with you. I wasn't a grad student. I wasn't a faculty. And you were a postdoc. So you couldn't really go and hang out with all the students there. You don't really belong to faculty crowd, or they don't really think you belong to them. Or even if you do, who knows whether you can spend some time with them or not. So tell you the truth, I find myself being very, very miserable for good 6 to 9 months. And halfway through the program, I realized this entire academic path is not for me. I'm not cut for it, as easy as that. So speaking of moving and changing career path, I made a decision, moved back to DC area. Meanwhile, I applied for jobs. There were R&D jobs, there were things, and my entire research was focused on forensic science and fire and all that. Then I realized if I want to stay in the same thing, I gotta be buried in the corner of a lab doing experiments for the rest of my life, or do computational stuff, which primarily you're sitting behind a computer, which I'm still doing that. But then you are glued to one project for like 2-3 years. And this is like I was in my early 30s. And I just sat down and I think I thought through the process and I said, what exactly you want to do for the rest of your life? I mean, I know myself, and then I know my character. I cannot work on one thing for a long time. And then, although I love research, but I want it to be in my own way. I applied for many jobs and many positions, R&D positions. I even thought about moving to California. I did a couple of interviews with companies that they had offices in California. One particular company was in Boston. A few of them, they were not successful. I got a few job offers. Then I was really hesitant. I didn't really want to work with them because of, you get some feedback from people that they already have worked with the company. And out of blue, I had applied for a position as a patent analyst for a company in Alexandria, Virginia, and they had an office in Michigan. So I got an email from their recruiter. We spoke. Then I talked to HR. Then within a week, they managed to get me a phone interview with one of the team leads, and then come to the office and have a in-person interview. And it just happened so quickly because I had promised and signed a contract to teach math and physics in a local college in Virginia for the rest of the summer. And I was doing interviews thinking, all right, these people are going to get back to me in 3 months. And when I was talking to the team lead, he was based in Michigan. And they read my resume and they say, are you interested in working in our Michigan office or Alexandria, Virginia office? And I ran away from Michigan. And I said, don't even mention that state to me, let alone have me move back to Michigan. So, and I haven't visited Michigan since I moved. Nothing wrong with Michigan. Don't get me wrong. I think I had a rough time in Michigan. So, make the long story even longer. The interview went too quickly. They liked me. And then they said, start the position. And I said, I already have promised these people to teach these classes in the college, local college, Nova College, Northern Virginia College. And they said, oh, you don't want to start too quickly? And I said, I promise. I'm teaching like 4 days in a week. And I never thought you guys are going to get back to me too quickly. But they said, well, the offer is open. Go finish whatever you're doing for like a month and a half. And then I wanted to travel and visit my family. And then in October, I decided to start with them as a patent analyst. The company was amazing. The entire team, they were really, really nice people. They trained me. I didn't have any intellectual property or patent education whatsoever. The training was for a month. And then I worked with some of the really, really best people that I'm in touch with. And then it was around after a couple months or after a year, I decided to work as a contractor for the same company. And the company, I heard, is going to be acquired by one of the biggest companies. And then I started doing like smaller projects with them. And then I started doing other things. And then by then I really learned everything about patents and intellectual property and all that. But I was still living in Virginia, suburbs of Washington, D.C. The company grew. I hired contractors. I learned more and more and more. And then someone told me something about startups and intellectual property and how much they need this service. But then working with law firms is very expensive for them. And the mecca for startups was Bay Area, San Francisco.
Yeah.
I mean, entire state of California, and then up in Seattle, which things were moving up to Seattle. And now, if you look at it, they're kind of located in Austin, Texas, but now it's so scattered.
Yeah, it's scattered all over the states now.
And I forgot something else. When I was looking for a job, a position opened at the Seneca College in Ontario. And one of the faculty members that he was about to retire, he said, it's a teaching position, come and talk to people. But since I'm going to retire, you can do research. And then after that, I talked to those people. They discouraged me. But the option of moving to Canada was, for the second time, was in front of me. And I said, forget it. Anyhow, so when we got to, I started working with some startups in Seattle, Bay Area, particularly West Coast. And we were talking about 2015, 2016, because the entire ecosystem of startup, I think, has changed over the past couple of years, particularly during a pandemic and right after pandemic, things changed. So no one would have guessed that startup ecosystem could be anywhere in the world. People underestimated Ontario and Toronto for being a hub for startups. Even folks in the States, they never thought that this is going to happen. Our neighbor up north, what do they know about startups? But guess what? They do. Anyhow, Good friend of mine who lives in BC with his family, and I know him for almost 40 years. He encouraged me to move to Canada, and it was during the time in the States that I think I don't want to refer to it as what it was, but immigrants were not really well accepted. We know what happened a couple years ago. But I talked to my friend, and then I talked to many people in Canada, and I realized intellectual property has been underestimated in Canada, for the lack of a better term, or there's so much room for improvement when it comes to IP. And I decided to bring the business with me to Canada. Nice. At that point, I talked to multiple different attorneys, and they told me, if you want to run the business yourself, you got to be a Canadian permanent resident or citizen, because you want to have the ownership. Otherwise, you have to have someone to run the business for you. And I said, no, I want to own my own business. I don't really want others. I don't mind people working with me, but then it is my company. Therefore, I got to be in charge. And I decided to apply for permanent residency. And then in July of 2018, I landed as a new immigrant to Canada. And as the saying goes, third time is the charm. So third time was the time that I made a decision. Believe it or not, the first time was back in 2004 to come and do a PhD at the University of Toronto almost 20 years ago. Second time was back in 2011. And now it's 2018, July, and I landed as a new immigrant. But it was quite a journey, to be honest with you, and I don't really regret anything. One thing that I regret every now and then, I say I should have probably moved to Canada a little bit earlier, but who knows? Maybe that was my journey. I needed to move here and bring the business with me, and then had I moved as a grad student, it would have been a different story. Had I moved as a faculty at Seneca College, it would have been different. But maybe by choice, this was the right time for me. And then I look back and I don't really regret anything, that I made a decision to move here. And like I said, I love it. So as a person who has moved 13, 14 times between places, between apartments, between houses, now when they say you have to move, I don't say how, I say when.
Okay, yeah, you should start the moving company. I think so. I agree.
But truth to be told, it's not really running away from anything, or I mean, there are opportunities, and honestly, as I say, you're not a tree. You can definitely move, and that's something that many people. And I don't really know each person's situation, because I can speak for myself. When you have a child, when you have a family, it's 20 folds harder than if it's just you and moving around. But sometimes by just being scared of moving to a new place, the opportunities are just there, and you're saying no to them because you think, I'm comfortable and this is a comfort zone for me. Might as well just stay here. But if you decide to move, there are hardships. No matter what you do, your life will be a little bit harder than your comfort zone, because you need to go to a new place, you need to find a place, you need to pack, you need to unpack, you need to go and find new grocery stores, new friends, whatever. But then on the bright side, there might be so many different opportunities in front of you. Or even if you have loved ones or you have support system, they definitely will help you with the move process, which is amazing.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of go back, because I think that was a really interesting story, and I have a ton of questions around that. I think the first question I have for you is, like, I want to understand the individual who went from Iran to Washington to Michigan to Virginia and then to Canada. Like, do you think you're the same person? Like, how, like, what was happening to you through that process? Because, like, those are all different countries. I mean, they're cities in a way, but they are literally almost like mini clusters with different cultural nuances. And it just feels like you've gone through that journey. And now you're in Canada now. And I'm just trying to understand the person, how you've evolved over time.
And meanwhile, for a while I lived between Seattle and Vancouver. It was the other side of the border. I didn't really mention that because I thought it's local, but definitely, I'm not the same person who moved out from Iran 22 years ago. I see that evolution in myself. I see that I'm different, and every single time that I moved, I changed because number one, you age, and as you age, there's so many things that you learn throughout life. If you are one of those people that you're receptive and you want to learn from your experience or other people's experience. So, but every time I move to a new place, and every time I, um, spend some time with different individuals, and um, it was different as a grad student. The crowd that I was talking to and I was spending time with was totally different from the crowd that I spent time as a postdoc, as an employee, then as an entrepreneur. It totally changes. There are multiple different factors and parameters involved. You age, you go to different stages in life, your career, your position will dictate you certain things. But after every single move, you look back and you look at yourself and you see you left someone behind. Um, you're the same person, but that old version of yourself, you've learned so much. If you're such a person who wants to learn from past experience and from other people's experience, so you just leave that person behind and you move on. And as you move on, you realize you can go back and look at it, and you realize the mistakes that you made, the good things that you did. Some of them that were on purpose, some of them were you did it purposefully. But um, one thing that I can say, I don't really regret for the most part whatever I did. And for a while, I had this regret factor in my life that I said I should have done that, I should have done that. But uh, if I had a crystal ball, of course, if I knew this is going to happen, I would have done something else. With the best of knowledge that I had that particular day in my life, I made that decision. And then if I make the same mistakes over and over as I age, then the joke is on me. But then I don't really look at it that I made a mistake to move from one place to another. For a while in my life, I always thought that I made a mistake to move to Michigan and do a postdoc. I did regret that for good 3 years in my life. But now that after 3 years, I looked at it and I said, had I decided not to move to Michigan and do a postdoc, I would have always thought that there was a good position in academic system or academia for me, waiting for me. And then after giving it a try for a year, after 9 months, I realized I'm not really cut for it. My personality, the way I look at things, I'm not cut for it. And academic life is not easy, to be honest with you. It's as a professor, you need to do a lot of work. You need to submit proposals, grant applications, graduate students, undergraduate students, running the lab. It's too much work. And at the same time, you got to be careful about what you're cut for. I mean, is that a journey or destiny for you or not from a career standpoint and personal standpoint? So right now, based on things that they have happened over the past 8 months in my life, I've noticed that since I can work from anywhere and I run a business, I'm really flexible to be able to be with my family anywhere in the world and just provide a bit of a support to them. With certain jobs, you can't do that. It's not really an option. I mean, with for many people, that's not really doable because they have really great position and job, but then they cannot really work from anywhere, or they cannot hold on to their job for a long time when they work remotely. So when I look at those scenarios, I realize, had I decided not to do that, it would have been a different scenario, and I would have regretted all my life. So, as an example, after moving to Canada, the entire business changed for me. Initially, it wasn't easy because you think between the US and Canada, the language is the same, the culture somewhat is the same. Although I made the mistake initially and told many Canadians that, oh, you're very similar to Americans, then I realized, oops, that might be an insult to some of them. I refrain from saying that myself these days. But you would have thought that that transition would be really, really easy. But based on what you do and the nature of the job, it might be different. So I didn't really know it should be, when it comes to intellectual property, it's that different between the US and Canada. And when you start working with startups here, you realize there are so many opportunities, but at the same time, resources are different. Education in terms of intellectual property is different, and you got to provide that education to startup founders, co-founders, CTOs, and all that. So you may need to do other things when it comes to educating these individuals, and you may need to take different actions. I personally underestimated all that, but then after 3 years, I realized, well, it's a different country, and the ecosystem is slightly different from the US.
Yeah. Now, just staying on that topic, especially because when you talk about this, how similar they are, but yet so different. Like, what has been the most overwhelming moment for you just trying to transition from being an American, because you lived in America for a while, to becoming a Canadian immigrant? Like, what's been overwhelming making that switch for you?
One of the things that I noticed from the get-go was, although United States is also land for immigrants, but in Canada, people talk about being an immigrant quite often, whether they're a first generation, second generation, third generation. In fact, I talked to a lady at WeWork office that we had in downtown Vancouver, and the conversation revolved around the fact of being Canadian. And she said, let's define who Canadians are. I'm a third generation Ukrainian. My grandparents, they moved from Ukraine to Canada. I visited Ukraine many years later with my mom, but I wasn't born in Ukraine, neither did my mom. But, deep down, whenever I have a conversation, I still consider myself being from a Ukrainian immigrant family, because growing up, that's something that we grew up with, and it was always admired by my family members. So I noticed from the get-go that many, many, many individuals that I talk to in Canada, they do respect that. Not that in the US they don't do that, they do that, but then depending on where in the US you are, things could be slightly different. Then I realized the country has, give or take, 40 million population, is resourceful. People still criticize many things in any country, but I appreciate many, many different factors or many different things in this country. Maybe it was different when I moved to Canada. I moved as an immigrant here versus I moved as a grad student to the US. So, and again, going back to your previous question, I was at a different age. I was in my early 40s, late 30s when I moved to Canada versus I was in my early 20s when I moved to the States. Definitely, I was more well-rounded person. I had seen many, many things in my life, and I was a bit thick-skinned person compared to who I was when I was 23 and 24. So when they said no to me in Canada, I realized that I'm not going to give up. And when they told me no as a 23, 24-year-old, it did hurt. But then I realized that you build a thick skin and then you move on.
Yeah. Now, I would like to know, you have this, you've moved a ton of times, but do you still face the same emotions, when you're moving to a new place? Because, people say that courage is action in the presence of fear. And so I just want to know,
yeah,
every single time, just to face
of
those
course, you
same
get
emotions?
scared deep down that I'm going to move to a new place, no matter how old you are. And the older you get, the harder it is. Let's just face it. So it's not going to be easy. Don't get me wrong. But how much you show off that fear, that's a different story. or deep down, as you age in different stages, as a grad student, you pack a few suitcases and you probably sell whatever you have in a 1-bedroom apartment that you're sharing with a roommate, and you're done. But there's another thing. When you have a professional lifestyle, you're not going to randomly move. You know what you're doing, and there are so many different reasons and parameters and factors that you took into consideration and account when you're moving. So you are definitely in a different situation. You plan things accordingly. No matter how well you plan things, still there are so many unknown things there, and you need to play with different knobs. Clearly, there are certain things that we get attached to, and they're not really significant. Your local coffee shop, the office, the people that you know. And some of them, believe me, you come back in 6 months, they don't even remember who you are and they don't really care. So some of these things that we are glued to or we are attached to, they don't really mean much. Believe me, sometimes you think, oh, if I don't see that person, it's going to be the end of the world. Believe me, that person doesn't even know who you are. Or they may care, but they're not going to put a pause and hold on their lives because of you not seeing them every day you grab your coffee. The whole thing is not that easy, particularly when you age. Move is harder than when you're young, but you have different reasons for that move. Even if you're forced to move to a new place, there are reasons behind it. So those reasons and the rationale behind the move is totally different between the time that you're in your mid 40s as opposed to your mid 20s. And based on that, yeah, it's not easy. It might be scary. There is a fear factor involved, but then guess what? You just try to gauge everything. You try to balance things in your own mind, and then you listen to your mind, you listen to your heart, and take the right action. As they say, sometimes you need to think with your heart, and sometimes you need to fall in love with your brain. There's a balance between heart and brain, and then whoever thinks that one organ is going to do the job is just not thinking through the process, because sometimes your gut says you got to do this, and you just listen to that and you just go in.
Yeah. Now, another question I have, which is kind of related to this one, is how much of your cultural nuances that moved with you from Iran to Washington are still with you today? Because you've gone through some evolution, to be honest.
Many of it. I mean, deep down, I still think that I'm an Iranian. I mean, deep down, I don't really see much. And to tell you a true story, over the past 8 months, because of the incident that my dad had, he had a brain injury, and then
I'm so sorry.
the surgery. Thank you. And then I've been spending most of my time with them. And many people that I've been involved with over there, from the nurses, some of them, it's really hard for them to believe that I haven't lived in the country for 22 years. Particularly when I want to speak Farsi to people over there. I'm really careful to refrain from using any English terms whatsoever, because I think if you speak one language fluently, you can manage to speak that language without using other words. And deep down, when it comes to culture, I still think that I pretty much act like an Iranian in many aspects. But then comes things that I've learned over the past 22 years from North American culture, which I really admire some of it. Being transparent, being really frank, being hard worker, being a team player, not try to cheat the system. Those are some of the values that I've learned from every and each of individuals that I've been lucky and fortunate enough to work with over the past 22 years. There's something about North American culture, and when I say North American, this is very similar between the US and Canada, that when people accept something, when they say, I'll do it, when they say that, they really, the ownership and taking that ownership matters a lot to them. If they don't want to do something, they say no. Halfway through the process, if they realize this is not what they're doing, they just say, you know what, this is not something that I sign up for. But then when they say yes to something, they deliver. They promise and they deliver for the most part. Don't get me wrong. There are exceptions in any culture or any countries. But then one of the things that I've learned from them, you're an adult. You're a person who has brain. Think before accepting or signing anything. And if you cannot really deliver, do not promise.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I've learned. Whether I'm doing it right or not, that's debatable, and people can make that decision.
Because I think we're rounding up now. So, and this is really good, to be honest. I feel like this has been a full-on advice on how to move, no matter the age you are.
And
but I was
even to this day, when people ask me whether they have to move or not, I say, I don't know. I mean, I can't make any decisions for you. I mean, you need to live your life. I can't.
Yes.
I'm living mine. Whether I did the right thing or not, I don't know.
So there's this thing about survival mentality that first-gen immigrants go through. Like, you want to survive. And it feels like a lot of us get stuck in just surviving. Like, we just want to survive. How do you deal with that? Like, as an immigrant, how do you deal with that? Like, have you thought about it before? Or is it just something that?
Yeah, survival is, I mean, it's a really, really interesting thing that, yes, you need to survive. And then survival, particularly when you're above a certain age and you're an adult and you need to make decisions and you need to take care of other people around you. Survival matters. But if you're just focused on survival, then you may miss so many other things in life. And um, you don't really go up the ladder if you just think you need to survive. It's a balance. And I'm pretty sure whoever listens to this say, oh, what do you know? You need to survive and you don't really have to survive. No, we all need to survive. But at the same time, you need to think about making progress. I mean, many people move as an immigrant and then they start from ground zero or even way below zero because guess what? They had a faculty job in their home country. When they move to a new country, that opportunity is not handed over to them here. Some of them they start with, you know, working at places that no one really thought one day they would have done that. But guess what? They're not stuck there because of survival. They find a way, they do certain things for 3 months, and after that they do something. I'm not really trying to tell people what to do. I started working when I moved to the States to work in the computer lab for a School of Engineering and Applied Science at George Washington University. Proudly, I will talk about it. And then for some reason, I applied and I had some free time and I also used that. And I worked at the computer lab, essentially creating accounts for students and then handing over their printouts and then helping them with when their accounts were locked out and things like technical stuff. And I remember the first summer I was allowed to work 40 hours a week as a grad student. I was doing 20 hours of research, 20 hours working there, and no one wanted to open the computer labs at 8 o'clock or 7:30 in the morning. And I'm an early bird, and I would do that. And it got to a point that the semester started, and I realized I cannot really do this job because I wanted to do research and teaching full time. And then I informed the computer lab manager and everyone that guess what, I can't really do this anymore. And they got really irritated that, oh, why, who's going to open the doors, who's going to be that nice person who's going to help people out. And he was being sarcastic. Honestly, he was really happy for me, but I didn't end up doing that job. And there's nothing wrong with that job, don't get me wrong, but like that was a short period of time for survival, quite frankly. But then you got to look for other opportunities in front of you. Many people come as a student, they get a degree, then they find a different job. And after a few years, they do another job. You need to survive, but at the same time, be focused on what your ultimate goals are. Because if you get really, really, um, too close to survival and that's all how to get by, then that big picture or the goal that you had in mind in order to move from your hometown or home country to a new place, that's going to vanish eventually because all you can think of is just get by every day. And if I get through this day, tomorrow, what I'm going to do? Well, you have a long-term plan and you have short-term. Short-term plans are for survival. I understand that. But the long-term plan, don't let that to become a mirage, because that's the last thing you want.
Yeah. So I'm probably going to ask you one last question with that. What misconceptions have you faced that people have about life in your home country, like here in Canada or in the States?
One of the things that I keep talking about that to many of them, they think life is easier. They have this misconception about the challenges. The challenges in life for survival or for on a daily basis is the same, no matter what. Each country has its own challenges, and you cannot really say that the challenges, of course, they're going to be different. You don't really get stuck in traffic for 6 hours every day. You don't really face certain things here. But then some of them, they think that the minute that you land here, many things are going to be handed over to you without even fighting for it. You need to fight for every single thing, no matter where you are. You need to learn how to fight for life, how to fight for your business, your career, you name it. But one of the stories that I remember was back in the day in 2010 or 11, when I traveled once back home. Someone was asking me about the price for iPhone. I think back in the day it was iPhone 7 or 6 or something. I don't really remember which version was it. And then I said $750 or $800. And the person said, $800 over there is nothing. And my answer was $800 is $800 no matter where you live. Earning and making that money is hard, and spending it is easy if it's not your money and you haven't really worked hard for it.
Yeah.
But then that's one of the things that people think. They underestimate the hardships that you may go through living somewhere that you are an immigrant, because you need to go through certain things here in order to prove yourself first, and then start building many things, from relationships, from networking, you name it. That's one of the biggest things that I think people need to realize, that that's a challenge and it's real. And many immigrants that I've talked to, they face the same thing. They say, many of my family and friends back home, they think our lives are really, really easy here, because, they think that making money, earning money, and good lifestyle is really easy here than our home country. And so many of the challenges that they go through on a daily basis, they think they don't really exist. The challenges are challenges, but the style and the method that you deal with them might be different. And it even varies from one country to another, from one individual to another individual. So the challenges are there. Your approach would be different.
Yeah, it's a challenge I face too, because people just ask you stuff and they kind of assume that it's just because you leave out of the country, you should do it. And you're like, we actually have to work 2x harder here.
It's very amazing as a human being how much we take for granted. It's amazing. No matter where we live, no matter what we do.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it, actually.
We tend to take things for granted. And once we don't really have those things, whatever those are, we come to a conclusion that I might have taken this for granted. I mean, once you lose it, it dawns on you that, hey.
Yeah. I guess it's just a human condition. It's just a thing we're preconditioned to act that way, and then you have to now say to yourself, okay, I'm not going to do that, or else you just do that without thinking.
Yeah.
This has been really good. I was hoping to do a 30-minute call with you, but it's 48 minutes and we're still talking.
Yeah, we went over. I thought we were gonna do 45 minutes, but sorry, I started getting really.
That's okay.
We started talking and I lost track of time. It was one of those podcasts or interviews that I didn't even notice. It's been almost 50 minutes that we've been talking. And
yeah, this has been so good. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And yes, have a great day. Whew. that was something. Like, to be honest, like, I really did plan to make this a 30-minute episode, but we spent 45 minutes just talking. Like, it was really good. Please, again, as always, if you found this episode useful, give us a like, share, follow us on YouTube, Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcast. And if you know someone who will find this useful, please send it to them. Thank you so much and have a beautiful day.